Tucson, Arizona, and have moved to the South, so 20 years in the South, and how she grew up in the South and has moved out west to my neck of the woods.
That's pretty funny.
Swamp places. So yeah, we'll talk about that and see if it's a
Jamie and I had a warm-up at the Mississippi Book Festival on the Southern Fiction panel, and we actually have matching bracelets, don't we?
Yeah, what does yours say?
I can't read mine, I don't know.
Okay, so
It's upside down for one thing.
this wonderful young woman who's 23, because I asked, made Taylor Swift-style friendship bracelets for every author, female, in the festival. Tailored to their name, so mine says "Je ne sais Quatro."
And mine says all. Wait a minute. It has Gwin in it. Has Gwin in it. But all is well. The things roll, so you can't really tell.
All I do is Gwin.
Thank you. So we had a good time at the Mississippi Book Festival, and we're here to talk about both of our novels, and I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate Square Books and all the wonderful people here. I think it's my 34th time here, and I really, really love coming here, and I always look forward to it, so thank you so much. And thank you, Jenny.
Thank you. Do you want some?
Yeah, sure. Well, we talked about doing a little reading from our novels first, and then launching into conversation. So I'll do a little reading, and I'll start with the fact that one of the things I've been interested in for a long time are villains, and my first novel had a villain in it, and the father, and this novel has a villain in it, and I became interested in villains to the degree that I wrote a piece on writing villains and the challenges of writing villains, and also for LitHub, and I also wrote a piece for Electric Lit on different contemporary novels that have villains in them. And so I decided I would like to just read a little passage here where I introduce the villain in my story. This story is narrated by a character named Memory Feather, called Mem by her mother, called Feather by the man who they are with in terms of being a family. Mac McFadden is a gay man in the South. The novel is set in Mississippi on the Gulf Coast in the 1950s, which, as you know, is a time of a great deal of unrest in Mississippi, a great deal of change for the good in Mississippi, the civil rights movement, and down on the Gulf Coast, the wait-ins, and also nationally, Joe McCarthy was after the Pico communist, and Eisenhower had just, with his executive order 10,450, had prohibited any members of the gay and lesbian and other communities to work in the federal government. And so the main character here is Memory Feather, and she's looking back on the time when she was a girl. Memory has a disability, which she considers, she calls it her paw, and she considers it both a disability related to the loss of her father, who abandoned the family, and also she considers it as a positive thing in her relationship with non-human animals, whom she can hear talk to her. And so there's also a cat toward the end of this little passage. As July moved into August, the sound beckoned each morning. My mother had taught me to swim years before. With its long shelf and gentle tides, the sound was ideal for swimming lessons. We waded out until the shelf gave way, pools of tiny fish tickling first my calves, then my thighs and chest. Oh, and oh, and oh. My mother taught me to trust the sound. Salt water will always hold you up if you let it, but you have to relax and let it, she said, when teaching me to float. There's nothing here to harm you. Every morning that summer of my 13th year, my mother and I swam side by side across the horizon. The water rested me in a deep way. When we tired of swimming, we flopped over on our backs and bobbed in the slight waves, holding hands to stay together. In the water there was a gentleness to my mother. She always floated on my right side, where my good hand was. If it slipped out of hers, she'd reclaim it, laughing, "Come here, you." In those moments, I thought all was right with the world. I thought the rest of my life had opened up, an oyster shell, a pearl. Sometimes, though, a story can hit a riptide, a moment of inattention, and down you go, thrashing, fighting for breath, into the murky darkness below. The morning that Matt called and invited my mother and me for a celebratory supper, he didn't say what he was celebrating or that he had been expecting a visitor. I made potato salad with lots of Zatarain's mustard and dill pickle the way he taught me. My mother snagged some fresh strawberries at a fruit stand on the side of Highway 90. Matt met us out on the porch. "I've got a surprise, Feathers," he said, hustling us through the front door. "Meet the man in the portrait, our beautiful dreamer." As I came through the door, my jaw dropped. There before us sat the man in the painting that hung in Mac's living room. He was older than his likeness and even more beautiful. His name, dreamily alliterative, Antonio Alessandro Amato. He was sitting on the sofa, his arms flung wide across the back, the sleeves of his yellow shirt draped like butterfly wings. He leapt to his feet, teeth flashing white, a shock of dark hair picking up the glow of the lamplight. He was delighted to meet us, finally. He'd heard so much about us from Mac, and weren't the two of us knockouts? Please, we must call him Tony. There was an inflection in his way of speaking, something of a lilt that seemed exotic. He took my mother's hand and kissed it an unnecessarily long time. Then he snatched up mine, the good one, and kissed it, not once but twice. Each time his lips hovered. I could feel the tip of his tongue, the moisture from his mouth. I snatched my hand away, then rubbed it on the back of my shorts. At that point, I'd never been kissed by anyone except my mother, who still kissed me goodnight. A dry whisper of a peck on the cheek, and Mac, who in moments of exuberance might see fit to kiss the top of my head. Nor did I have a boyfriend. Boys took one look and saw my clenched hand. A few seemed fascinated by it, but not in a good sort of way. So that's our introduction to Tony Amato, and he proceeds to tell a whole lot of lies. You have a villain in your story too. And you have an institutional villain too.
Yes, Two-Step Devil is. So I'll thank you for that reading. That little piece is gorgeous, gorgeous. Yeah, I can't wait to talk about the kind of the trio that you have as the family that's set up that with Virginia and Memory and Mac, and then the interruption of that family, and that's similar to what happens, I think, in this novel where you have the prophet, who's the main character, Two-Step Devil. He's a man who's living off-grid in Lookout Mountain, Alabama. He's an outsider artist, although I will say my daughter corrects me when I use that phrase, outsider art. She works in Gallery World, New York City. She says, "Mom, it's self-taught artist is the correct phrase now, or non-conformist artist, no longer outsider." So, yeah. I keep saying outsider art because I think we're all familiar with that term. The self-taught artist living off the grid. It's the year 2014, near the end of Obama's second term. And this man has visions. he believes they're from God about the end of the world, and that a big fish is coming from Washington, D.C. that will take his visions to the president to warn him about what's to come. And so he's waiting for this big fish. He goes to the junkyard. He paints on scrap materials, whatever he can find, and he sees across the access road a car pull up to an abandoned gas station. Two shady-looking characters get out and remove a young girl from the back seat, a teenager, and there are zip ties on her wrists. And he comes to believe that she is being trafficked and that he is meant to rescue her because she will take his visions to the White House. So what ensues is a dramatic rescue scene, and then something really unexpected, which is a sort of tender grandfather-granddaughter relationship story between these two marginalized, voiceless characters. Meanwhile, is the villain, this devil figure that inhabits the prophet's cabin shows up from time to time and kind of torments him. So the novel takes place in 3 parts. The prophet's section is the third person, his point of view. The girl has her own section in the first person, and then the devil takes the stage, literally, in the book's third act, in the form of a 1-act play. So, yes, I hope you're not intimidated to read it. It's actually, even though those topics seem really heavy and dark, I think it's a lot of humor in this book. People read it and tell me they laughed, which it makes me happy because I laughed a lot when I was writing it as well. It's not a COVID novel at all, 2014, but I did finish it, wrote the bulk of it during that lockdown time. And it was a time in which I felt very isolated, we all did, longing for human connection and love, and so I think that desire for connection really inflected the book and the relationship between these two characters and what they experience for each other. I mean, he starts out thinking that she's a means to an end, and ends up just wanting her to stay. And so they're like, in a way, trying to save each other, but their lives are being pushed apart for various reasons. She has a secret as well. So maybe I'll just read a tiny bit. I'm going to read it. Harper's excerpted it, and they did a phenomenal job of kind of taking piecemeal bits from various chapters and putting them all together. So it's just much easier to read what they did than it is to page through the novel and find all the parts they put together. So I'll just read a little bit from the Harper's excerpt. It's called Ezekiel Machine. He's building this machine that's wild. Have you seen those circular saw blades with the teeth like this? Mm-hmm. He's making this machine with 12 of them, from a small blade to a bigger, and they interlock so that when the smallest one spins, it will spin all of the rest like cogs. He's basing it on this passage in Ezekiel where it talks about these wheels with rims of eyeballs. That it's a really obscure passage. So he's painting them all with eyeballs and making this machine. So this takes place when he's in the junkyard looking for the smallest saw blade to finish his Ezekiel machine. The prophet stood on his porch, taking in the landscape. The soft earth was shooting up green everywhere he looked. Purple blossoms furrowed the red buds along his driveway. Here and there beneath them were sprays of yellow forsythia. Soon the cherries would be out. At the far edge of his field, a high-up breeze swayed the tips of the pines. A fine afternoon. He would drive down to the junkyard to look for the saw blade he needed to finish his Ezekiel machine. He got in his van and drove out to the highway, crossing the border from Alabama into Georgia and taking Nickajack Road to the base of the mountain. It was warmer down here, the dogwoods with their little white plates already set out on branches. At the junkyard in Flintstone, he pulled through the open gate and parked beside the abandoned office. He walked along the chain-link fence separating the junkyard from the access road. A circular blade the size of a saucer you might set under a teacup. That's what he was looking for. Teeth with a good thick kerf, nothing too rusted. He had 11 blades with spindles through their centers laid out and ready. When he found the 12th, the smallest, which he thought of as his Benjamin blade, He'd attach a battery-powered motor to make it spin. The teeth on the smallest blade would intersect with those on the next, which were bigger in size. And that blade would spin the one beside it, and so on. Small as a mustard seed, but able to move mighty equipment. He liked the idea of using thrown-away saw blades to make his machine. Something fallen raised up higher than it was before. He walked up and down along the fence, towing up scrap metal here and there. He didn't feel much like bending over. His left side was hurting him bad today. The sun was just starting to lower over the mountain when he heard tires on gravel. Through an opening in the fence where two straps had rotted out, he saw a black Mercedes pull up to the abandoned gas station on the other side of the access road. It parked between the convenience store and a shed with the word "Feed" spray painted on its side. The passenger door opened, and a thick-set man with a short beard and mustache got out. He wore a buttoned vest over a long-sleeved shirt, khaki shorts, and white athletic sneakers with tube socks to his knees. The woman who got out of the driver's side had short, spiky hair dyed the color of a Coca-Cola can. She opened the rear door. The prophet saw long legs and bare feet. The girl who stepped out looked like a teenager. She was taller than both the woman and the man, thin with messy dark hair falling around her face and shoulders, reaching almost to her elbows. She wore a long yellow sundress with spaghetti straps that fell down around her arms. She pushed them up, but they fell again. "Kingston," the woman said. "Where'd you put them pills?" The man reached into his vest pocket and tossed something that rattled. The woman caught it, took the girl by the elbow, and walked her around behind the store. The prophet waited, and when they came back, he saw the girl had changed into a short dress that sparkled like flashbulbs when she moved. She wore high-heeled sandals with straps around the ankles and had her hair piled up on top of her head. The woman and the girl got into the back seat together. The man got behind the wheel. When they pulled onto the access road, the prophet caught a glimpse of the girl's face in the rear window. She had her hands up like she was about to sneeze or push her hair behind her ears. There were zip ties on her wrists. The car headed out toward Chattanooga, no license plate. The prophet's heart stuttered against his ribcage. He tried to take shallow breaths, but the coughing overtook him. Only a glimpse. But he knew who the girl was. An angel of God. One of his innocents. He knew what she needed was rescue from the man in the vest and the woman with the Coca-Cola hair. He knew he was the one who was supposed to rescue her. And I'll stop there. So yeah, multiple villains.
Yes.
Multiple villains.
Absolutely. So,
where did this book start for you? How did this book come into being?
okay. And I'm going to ask you the same thing too. I had two things my book did that instigated this book. The first was that my mother and I were left by my biological father about the time I was born. And my mother and I had to move back in with my grandparents in Tupelo. And we lived there for about 7 or 8 years until my mother remarried. And my mother during this period was a very unhappy person for the most part. And her friend from grammar school and from high school named David Baker, a man named David Baker, who lived in Tupelo and who was gay, was the one person who could make my mother laugh. And I started thinking about my mother and David Baker and me, this is very innocent, I'm a child, as being a family, and that my mother should marry David Baker. And so that is one thing that instigated my thoughts about this unconventional family in the 50s. The second thing was that I've always been really interested in very charismatic, attractive, extremely attractive people, because those kinds of people can be both predatory and lead other people like ourselves who are intelligent human beings down dark roads, I think. And but they can also lead people into very good places as well. And so I've always been interested in those, and that these two things kind of coalesced in this book. Yeah, and so you, Jamie and I have fun.
Just saying that it did come a bit from your life, and the past two books that I've written, as some of you know, did come more from my life. They were featured a woman who's middle-aged, living in the South with children, involved in kind of like an affair. Not that part was coming from my life. It was dedicated to my husband, but this imaginative kind of reworking of a life that looks similar to mine, set in an area similar to mine. This book I am writing as far outside the bounds of my experience as I've ever written. This is a 74-year-old dying, a kind of marginal figure, a 14-year-old sex trafficking victim, and the devil. I used to get questions, how autobiographical is your work? And I keep thinking, I wonder if the brave soul is going to ask that question about this. Which character are you? But the genesis of this book was a day I was teaching my 15-year-old daughter to drive. We lived on Lookout Mountain. It's a terrible place to teach a child to drive. It's up and down and windy. So I drove her out the back of the mountain where the roads are straight, where I figured she could just handle going straight. And we got lost and ended up seeing this shack by the side of the road with pumpkins for sale. And it was October, pulled over to buy pumpkins, and a man came out and asked if we would like to see his art inside his cabin. And of course my daughter's like, let's go, Mom, get in the car. And I'm like, I'm in. I'm going into this guy. This is the writer me. And his name is Ralph, and that was the beginning of a friendship that has lasted 15 years, almost 15 years now. He's an incredible man and an incredible artist, and began sharing some of his visions with me. So he was the inspiration for the prophet character. The book is dedicated to him. The rest of the novel is a complete fabrication. The sex trafficking victim, the whole story. In the book, he's isolated. His son has rejected him, and he sees this girl as a chance to have kind of another chance to do it right before he dies. The real guy has a huge family and is beloved by everybody around him. So that was where I thought this man is straight out of Flannery O'Connor, the last of a dying breed, really. These outsider figures on the margins of the South, they really seem to inhabit and haunt the South, and I wanted to pay homage to him and capture him in some way, and also tell a really good story. So that's where it started. Yeah. What else? I know your book is the setting is important for both of us. Belcote, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
And that's a fictional place,
Yeah.
but it's actually based on a real place. Can you talk about why you chose to fictionalize a real town?
Yeah. Well, it's pretty simple, really. Belcote is a stand-in for Bay St. Louis, and I spent quite a bit of time in Bay St. Louis writing my first novel, and a very dear friend of mine down there gave me the use of part of her home for 3 days a week, and I was located in New Orleans at the time, and so for those 2 or 3 years that I was really working on Queen of Palmyra, I was situated down there in the summer. I was at the same time writing a book on Medgar Evers, and I was writing the book on Medgar Evers at the same calendar year, but I would spend my time on the Evers book during the school year. I was teaching at UNC in Chapel Hill, and I was during the school year, those 8.5 months, and then I would just launch into this novel down there. So I became very familiar with Bay St. Louis, But the reason I didn't set it in Bay St. Louis is because of the pandemic. Just as I had started doing a whole lot of work down there, going to the Hancock County Historical Society and so forth and so on, and trying to get a real sense of the place in the 1950s, and listening to people's stories and so forth. But the pandemic intervened, and I couldn't get down there, and I couldn't safely work on the book. So I decided, and also I was coming off of writing a really seriously historical novel about Tupelo, Mississippi in the 1936 tornado, and I felt like I had to get every street right, every little bitty detail right, because there was always somebody who was going to come up to you and say, oh, well, you didn't get that part right. You got the wrong street, or you got the wrong church, or whatever, So I just couldn't face that anymore.
No, I feel I read my first book was set on Lookout Mountain, but I fictionalized it. I needed certain streets to intersect that didn't intersect, and I can't tell you how many people were like, Lee Avenue and Scenic Highway do not come together right now. Fiction! So yeah, it's better to just change the name.
Absolutely.
Or I wonder if it had to do with fact checking. I published a story in the New Yorker last year. It was set in Tucson, and it was based on an anecdote my mother told me about people who had died, and the New Yorker made me put it in Phoenix and not Tucson, just in case.
Oh,
I just think it's just really like anything that anybody could possibly find overlap with real life. Some editors are very touchy about it. So. And the collection will be back in Tucson.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, sure.
Why, of course, as another writer, I'm really interested in form and everything. Why did you choose about, three-quarters of the way through the book to go into a kind of play, script, so-and-so, colon, and then, between the prophet and the devil, and also, why did you transform the prophet into Jesus at one point, right?
He plays the character in the play.
Oh, okay.
He's the actor.
Oh, okay.
Jesus. So the structure of the novel is based on the Bible. So you have prophecy, Song of Songs, Gospel, Revelation. There's an introit. I'm a classical pianist. I conceive of this book as a musical composition. So you have this overture, introit, 3 movements, and then a prestissimo coda. So it's the prophet's voice, the girl's voice, the devil, and then the 3 of them layer very rapidly over each other, kind of on spiral to the end. And the devils, I knew I was mapping onto the Trinity in this subversive way with the prophet, the girl, and the devil. And I knew I wanted a tripartite structure. I knew the devil was going to have his say. I just didn't know what form it would take, and it was a beastly process of figuring that out. I originally wrote the devil's section as a kind of a diatribe. The devil's diatribe was like 50 pages. It was everything I knew he wanted to say, but it was interminable. And I couldn't stand it myself. So I just thought, well, this is the first thing, right? I'm just getting out what the devil, it's like the devil wants to say, I am misunderstood. Thus, Satan in the Old Testament is actually a title, the adversary. It's not a proper name until the New Testament, revisions it that way. So the adversary in the Old Testament is like this neutral figure. In fact, I was just reading today this weird passage in Kings where Balaam's donkey talks. Does anybody know about this? It's so strange, but in the Hebrew, it's the ha-satan, stood in the way for an adversary, and it's the angel of the Lord. So, Satan isn't yet equated with evil. And so my two-step devil wants to just, if Milton's justifying the ways of God to man, it's like justifying the ways of Satan to humans. So I scrapped the diatribe. It had nothing to do with the prophet. I was like, I need to connect these characters. So I wrote it as a Q&A session between the 2 of them. And it was 2 disembodied, it was talking heads. I threw that out. When the prophet experiences his visions, a movie screen drops down. So I thought, how about a screenplay? So I wrote it as a screenplay. It's getting closer. But screenplays are very weird because there's very little description. If you read them, the directors want the actors to put most of it in. They want to leave a lot of space for improvisation. So I hated it. I was coming up against a deadline. I went to Yaddo. I sat in the dining room of Yaddo for 3 days straight and cried because I thought, I'm going to have to scrap the devil. This whole idea I had of having the devil in the book is going to go away. Went to the library, laid on the floor in the dark, and I just didn't know what to do. And I turned my head, and on the shelf beside me was a row of plays collated by this guy, Eric Lane. You know, plays for 20-year-olds, plays for 2 characters in their 30s, plays, and then a whole book of one-act plays. And I sat up all night and read one-act plays, and I found my form. And 7 scenes, in the one-act play. And it just came that way, and I love it. It was way too long at first. My editor made me cut it down, but I think it's just the right length. And what I realized after I wrote it is that I'd already seeded the stage idea throughout the novel. It's like my subconscious knew that this was the right form. So when the devil shows up, he's a performer. He shows up on a stage dancing, and he takes a bow. He removes his hat, takes a bow. When the prophet envisions defeating the devil, he imagines himself on a stage carving this giant X in the air. When the girl is being trafficked, she's instructed, or she has this ability to rise up out of herself and watch herself as if she's on a stage. I didn't plan that, but I do think it was a gift to myself. So when the devil finally takes his, has his say, of course it's a performer. He comes down to the front of the stage, removes his hat, and says, "Greetings, flesh sacks," to the audience, to you, the reader. So I think it's the right form, and I had to fight for it a little bit, but I'm glad I did.
You worked hard on it. Yeah. Sounds like you worked hard on it very much. Yeah.
Should we?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Is it time or no? How much?
Well, we were going to talk about the supernatural.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we were talking about that back then.
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So we both have characters who have the ability to kind of pierce the scrim between the material and the immaterial.
Mm-hmm.
Yours can hear animals speak in plants, and mine, the way he says it is can go around behind the world's curtain, that stage metaphor again, and then come back and draw what he sees.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think it is about marginalization or physical suffering and visionary?
Well, I think both of our books have quite a bit of trauma in them, and I think sometimes trauma evokes a kind of supernatural response, and whether my character, Memory Feather, actually can hear non-human animals and plants speak to her. They do speak to her, and the cat Minerva, who is a big, rather large black cat, speaks to her. Minerva is actually a great deal wiser than the two-legged creatures around her, and whether the cat speaking to her to Memory is in Memory's imagination or the wiser part of herself as she's listening to Minerva and the other non-human animals, or whether it's all, it is these animals actually speaking to her. Sometimes I think animals do speak to us. Then that's up to the reader, but she sees her paw, as she calls it, her hand, which is as wrinkled and twisted as an old grapevine, she says, and she's missing 2 fingers on her left hand. She sees that as an affiliation with the animal, with the non-human animal world, in a positive way. And so that relationship evolves as the novel closes but there is a very strong kind of spiritual spirit world. I would say maybe not so much spiritual as spirit world that she inhabits. And she actually becomes a wildlife biologist studying wading birds on the Gulf Coast. So this does kind of transmutate into herself as an older person decades later.
I think the connection in my character is the connection between mental illness and the visionary. This prophet was an alcoholic for many. This character. I think that readers would get the sense that he's probably a schizophrenic, and so there's definitely a connection between trauma, mental illness, and these visionary experiences. I think there's also something about the dying moments becoming theatrical. Everyone's seen Angels in America.
Oh yeah.
Like there is this, but it's the theatricality of the dying. There's also the Ars Moriendi tradition, which was the book of the art of dying, in the medieval times, which was actually an instruction manual, basically conceiving of the person's dying bedside as a duking out of the angels and the demons for the person's soul. So there's this long tradition of theatricality emerging at the moment. All That Jazz is another show where this happens, where somebody's dying and imagining their life on a stage. And so the play, getting back to the visionary and perhaps why this man is experiencing it, he's dying. And it's in his dying moments that this play emerges. So, and that these visions begin to happen and drop in on him. Mental illness and suffering and sickness and the visionary and the ability to see the spirit world, I think, are very much connected as well.
Yeah, I think there's something kind of that rises above some of that in the book, that we can kind of peg him. It's easy to label, him as a schizophrenic. It's very easy to label my girl character as someone who just has a kind of wild imagination brought on by her aloneness, because she is isolated because of her hand, and also because she doesn't have a father in a culture that kind of demanded that you do have a father unless he had died in World War II. And so we can easily kind of peg that, I think, as easy to explain. But yet, I think in both cases, neither of our novels go for easy explanations of this kind of piercing of the scrim, as you say.
Right. Yeah, I don't ever want to make an answer for our reader. I want readers to come away wondering.
Exactly. Right.
Now should we?
Yes.
Does anybody have any questions?
So, Minrose, in my life, I have met people that could communicate with non-human animals and plants. There were different people, but I always thought it was really magical in some ways that they could communicate, and I felt like that they were really communicating. So, did you talk to people or do research? There are some books and different things in creating your character.
I didn't. No, I didn't. I actually have a friend who says she speaks Equus. She's a horse person, and she says she speaks Equus, and she's written essays on speaking Equus. And I don't know. I think all of my life I have felt like I had non-verbal communication with animals. So it just kind of came naturally to me to write about that. But I didn't go do research into people who can speak to animals. I didn't do that. No. Perhaps I should have.
No, I just wondered.
Yeah.
And also, Jenny, I was intrigued when you said in your writing that there were parts that made you laugh out loud. And I just find that very engaging, that you said that. And can you elaborate on that a bit?
I think it's not a good thing. Joy Williams told me, she said, if you're having too much fun when you're writing, you need to stop it. That means whatever you're writing is not good. Like, I've heard her say that in interviews too, that you should be very suspect of any material that's coming out if you're having too much fun. And I think she's onto something, because if you're having a lot of fun, you're gonna just keep going and overwrite, and it's gonna be too long, which is exactly what happened. So it's a matter of just letting that happen and then editing, you know.
Pulling yourself back in.
Right, reining it in. About 98% of what I do is editing. Editing the crap that I let myself do. First time. Yeah.
That surprises me that Joy Williams would say something so dumb. Because that strikes me as really dumb. I mean, we all know the use of humor,
Yeah.
how important it is in our lives, how that gets you out of horrible
Yeah.
places where you might be,
Yeah.
and how it engages readers.
No,
and,
she didn't say not
and
humor. She didn't say not humor, but not to write humor. Because she's one of the funniest writers.
that's why I'm so surprised.
No,
I'm
no,
like,
no, that's not what she said. She said when you're drafting, if you're having fun with your draft and you're cracking yourself up and you're like, oh, this is to be suspect of it. Not, but she didn't say don't write funny.
Okay.
Does that
Yeah.
clarify?
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
a little more sense.
Like, I think she's writing her humor, but like, probably, like, yeah, this is really funny, but not like cracking up, you know, I don't know.
That you're
I
getting
don't know
too
what it was.
distracted.
Yeah, too distracted or something. 'Cause I told her how much fun I had writing the play, and she said, oh. That's gonna mean you're gonna have a lot of editing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the readers are supposed to have fun, but you're not.
I guess. Just to be suspect and to watch what you're doing if you're really having a good time. I don't know, maybe that's just her. Maybe that is bad advice. Oh, yes.
I do have a question because it was interesting and I've never heard that before. For both of you, you had made the comment that you wrote your character, of one of your characters out first before you moved to the other one. So that was interesting to me that you could actually write out one of your characters before another one was introduced.
Are you talking to me or to Minrose?
No, I'm sorry, I'm speaking
To
to you.
me?
Yes.
Did I say that I wrote a character
Did you
first?
say that you wrote the character out for the devil or the prophet prior to introducing the next one?
That's how the novel is structured, but
Okay.
definitely not how I drafted it.
Okay,
It was a mess drafting it. I mean, I had all three characters all along.
okay.
But yes, the structure takes that form of first the prophet's third person, then the girl's first person, and
Okay.
then the devil's play, and then the three of them at the end.
Okay.
But where those all came while I drafted, who knows?
Yeah.
But that's a great question.
I think both of our novels have a kind of triad of characters. Yours are very much in conflict with each other. Well, at least one of them, the devil, is in conflict with everybody else. And mine are in very simpatico, despite being an unconventional family in the 50s in Mississippi. But they get blown apart by this guy who comes in and is very predatory and charismatic. So I think the structure, though, of that triad is the same.
Yeah, it's the classic.
Yeah,
The classic.
the classic triad.
And then that fourth